Hello everyone. So it's been a while since I made a video, and the reason for that was because I kind of couldn't decide what to really choose next to cover. There have been a lot of things going on recently between North Korea and more recently now the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville. So, and I also had an idea to do a video on Obama, but I'm shying away from doing that because it seems pretty irrelevant at this point. Like, Trump has kind of just been pushing things so far beyond the pale that it's like you can't like attribute anything, I almost feel like, to the Democrats at this point for how bad Trump is and what he's doing, and the fact that there's a lot of fake news surrounding like all the supposedly positive things that Trump's doing, like, oh, job creation, this and that. Well, I mean, Obama got the economy, running a lot better under his 8 years, coming off the Great Recession. So, to attribute these things to Trump, I mean, if there's a real specific narrow thing, I guess maybe, but broadly speaking, I mean, Obama was able to stimulate a lot of growth in the economy, and especially in the private sector, which Republicans and right-wingers, love to say is like the big standard for, bettering the economy. So I want to just focus on three kind of hot button issues right now. And the Russia one is actually kind of dying down, I would say, at this point. It's really not in the headlines as much I see anymore. But there was a recent article out by The Nation, which was extremely interesting. And I'm going to read some quotes here. So here, quote, "The president's ability to conduct foreign policy, notably, but not only with regard to Russia, is now crippled." So I just want to pause there for 1 second and explain kind of why that is. And why it's important, I would say. The strongest claims for interference in the election, I feel, are pretty unsubstantial, because when you're talking about the election results and people voting, as I've always held, Russia didn't hold a gun to these people's head. They chose to vote for Trump, and a lot of them also chose to believe in quote-unquote fake news and propaganda on the right. Now, as far as Russian involvement there in kind of shaping opinion, that seems to me like pretty standard politics. And I mean, we can always point to these things on the left too, or at least relatively speaking, because something like MSNBC has a clear bias in favor of the Democratic Party, and it's much more liberal in that way. You could even look kind of more extreme, like Media Matters, which is like, I almost think like a Clinton kind of propaganda machine. So these things do exist. They're kind of all over the place, and that's the struggle with journalism. You have to actually do investigative work and put the effort in to show what your point is, and also why it's substantiated. So if you're saying like, oh, Russia put out fake news, I would say like, yeah, well, why weren't you out there trying to cut through the hot air? Why weren't you out there trying to correct the record? So I'll go back to this article here from The Nation. So it's crippled because forced into a corner, having no choice, Trump just signed legislation imposing severe new sanctions on Russia and European companies working with it on pipeline projects vital to Russia's energy sector. Striking this close to the core of another nation's economy is customarily considered an act of war. We must not forget. That's pretty alarming too, I would say. I mean, I don't know exactly how accurate that is, but I would say if it's not considered an act of war, it's some kind of intervention, some kind of raising of tension with another nation, which I would say is not good to be doing right now with Russia. Of course, we outweigh their military, not even close. But I would say it's for the betterment of our safety to not be inching closer and closer to World War III with Russia or whatever country you might name. I mean, at this point, you could say North Korea, you could say Iran. A lot of people are obsessed with military intervention in our government. And those are three countries, Russia, North Korea, Iran, that we're kind of on, maybe we're not on the very brink, but we're going towards that brink and seeing it kind of in slow motion, if you will. So in retaliation, Moscow has announced that the United States must cut its embassy staff by roughly 2/3. All sides agree that relations between the United States and Russia are now as fragile as they were during some of the Cold War's worst moments. To suggest that military conflict between two nuclear powers inches ever closer can no longer be dismissed as hyperbole. And all this was set in motion when the DNC's mail server was first violated in the spring of 2016, and by subsequent assertions that Russians were behind that hack, in quotes they put. And I'll get to why that is. Because there was a team of researchers and experts that did their own investigating, and this is what they found. This is like a quote from their report. There was no hack of the Democratic National Committee's system on July 5th last year. Not by the Russians and not by anyone else. Hard science now demonstrates it was a leak. A download executed locally with a memory key or a similarly, geez, I can't talk today, portable data storage device. In short, it was an inside job by someone with access to the DNC system. This casts serious doubt on the initial hack. As alleged, that led to the very consequential publication of a large storage of documents on WikiLeaks last summer. Forensics investigations of documents made public 2 weeks prior to the July 5th leak by the person or entity known as Guccifer 2.0 showed that they were fraudulent. Before Guccifer posted them, they were adulterated by cutting and pasting them into a blank template that had Russian as its default language. Guccifer took responsibility on June 15th for an intrusion the DNC reported on June 14th, and professed to be a WikiLeaks source. Claims essential to the official narrative implicating Russia in what was soon cast as an extensive hacking operation. To put the point simply, forensic science now devastates this narrative. So, apparently, there's a lot more going on in this Russia story, debacle, whatever, than we thought. It's not as simple as, the Russian military was just trying to hack the DNC and get all this information out there. Like, at this point, someone was clearly in the DNC system. They were able to download this stuff. It's a leak. So that's why it's a lot more complicated than just like, Putin's our shadow leader, dictator. Well, I would say that's pretty definitive, especially since one of these investigators working on this was a man by the name of William Binney, who was very well known kind of going back to the war in Iraq, and he helped in a lot of ways shape the NSA to what it is now, and helped develop a system in order to obtain metadata and store it. So he has since kind of regretted what his life's work is, because it's being used by the government to spy on millions of Americans warrantless. and now he's kind of trying to speak truth to power, if you will. And some people might even say, "Oh, yeah, that's like a bias. Clearly, like he's against America. He's against the NSA." Well, okay, he's a veteran. First of all, I think it's fair to say at least that he cares about the best interests of his country, right? And they're using science here. They're using real data to back up their claims. So to just dismiss it, and I've seen a lot of mainstream coverage of this article saying like, "Oh, this article is incoherent. I don't think that's true at all," or whatever. Well, I mean, what are the specific claims here? I mean, like I say, the strongest claim, no one's really come out and definitively said that Russia affected the election results. All they're saying is that they hacked the DNC and gave that information to WikiLeaks to release. So I would say that's just transparency in government, and that needs to be had. I mean, Roger Stone, who is a very conniving individual, like appears on InfoWars regularly now on Alex Jones' show, and he dismisses the whole Russia thing, which I want to be clear, like I don't necessarily want to dismiss it offhand completely and say there's nothing true about the Russia, not necessarily interference, but connection to Trump. I would say that there's more of a connection to like Russian oligarchs, and that could be, troubling to say the least. Like to have kind of corrupt connections. But Roger Stone misses the point when he's like trying to say, oh well, this Russia thing is completely false. There's nothing about it that's true. And then he points to this Politico article, which I believe I've talked about at least once or twice, how Hillary and the DNC dug up dirt on Donald Trump using people from Ukraine. So the people in the Ukrainian leadership, because a lot of them were like officials. It's obviously the government that's has an interest in this. So they dug up dirt on Donald Trump, and you could almost say that's interference because you have a foreign power weighing in on it. So I would say that transparency, you need it on both sides. So whether it's the WikiLeaks release that revealed a lot of very embarrassing information about the DNC and Hillary Clinton, and not just embarrassing, but just flat out like you're pretty much tipping the scales in favor of Hillary when clearly there was a really uptick in populism with Bernie Sanders that is quite unprecedented, and to dismiss that kind of like as this fringe, like a lot of people do, say like, oh, these Bernie bros, these privileged white dudes who don't know anything. Well, there's a new Harvard study out that actually says that Bernie is more likely to be liked by minorities. Not by, I mean, I wouldn't say a very big percentage. Like it's something around 15% difference with African Americans, and I believe Latinos, they may like him more than African Americans, but that's besides the point. The fact is, Bernie started out at like 2% in the polls, went on to basically tie the primary with Hillary, extremely close race, won 22 states. So this guy who basically had no national spotlight whatsoever went up against one of the most behemoth political figures ever, Hillary Clinton. So that's an impressive feat. And what those WikiLeaks releases show is that the people in the establishment were definitely tipping the scales by doing numerous things like rigging the debate schedule. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to resign in disgrace over these things. So that's all I'm going to say about Russia. I think I've gone on too long as that for that. But just the last point to kind of wrap it up is transparency in government, important on both sides, and as a candidate and as president. So in other words, your record should really be 100% public. You should be completely transparent with what your actions are and what your financial holdings are. So Trump has not done that. He's not released his tax returns. So he's not at all great. But Hillary was definitely trying to hide certain things about her record or obfuscate about them. So now we go to North Korea, which is, it's becoming its own debacle in the sense that our leadership is not doing the right things whatsoever, and they're completely just going off the rails. You have Trump basically being a man-baby on Twitter, provoking Kim Jong-un, who's, a psychopath, and saying, we're going to, inflict fire and fury on you if you just so much as, aggress, a little bit by, doing this, missile test, it's going to be, the fucking world ended. Literally, it comes down to kind of just these empty threats, and you're just kind of throwing shade at the other person, trying to out peacock them, you know what I'm saying? Like you're trying to go back and forth and show how macho you are. So Trump and Kim Jong-un are exactly those kind of people. They're they bloviate constantly, about themselves. They're narcissists. And Trump is just playing with fire, because I believe that Kim Jong-un is, really crazy guy, authoritarian dictator who essentially holds his population hostage. But I do think that he's smart enough to understand that if he were to do any kind of preeminent attack, preemptive attack on South Korea, just anywhere, Guam, or try to launch a nuke at the U.S., that would be the end of him. That would be the end of him and his regime. So, the thing with Kim Jong-un is that he's trying to be as strategic as possible. He's not going to do something that's going to be just a complete strategic blunder. The U.S. has done that time and time again with foreign policy. But what we've seen with North Korea is they're just pouring every amount of money into their military because they're trying to up the ante, I guess, if you want to say that, in that way. They're just beefing up their defense, and it's because they feel Kim Jong-un probably feels threatened and by all the pressure that's going on, with China, because he doesn't have a great relationship with China. It's almost a little bit leans in favor of North Korea. For example, China said if we were to attack them first, China would. Well, I'm sorry. If North Korea were to attack first, they would remain neutral. China would remain neutral. So that's a little questionable, I would say. I mean, at least they're saying neutral and not on North Korea's side. But China is, dubious of us, I would say, and that's important. But yeah, the thing is, Kim Jong-un is not going to act outside of a scenario where he's preserving his regime, right? He's going to want to do everything possible to make sure that he maintains power. And that gets into actually the solution to the North Korean problem. But before I get to that, Steve Bannon is out, and a lot of people are happy about that. He's kind of like this anti-Semite, white supremacist. He ran I cannot speak today. Breitbart News. He ran, and he's almost like Trump's Goebbels in a way. But he's out of the White House now. He had recently said there's no military solution to North Korea because Bannon is someone, he's very different for a conservative. He's not a neocon because he's against intervention for the most part. I mean, he's said that our actions in the Middle East are very foolish. And actually, I don't know how consistent that's been, but he's trying to say, like, he's more protectionist. We should be investing more money here instead of nation building, somewhere else. So it's hard to tell whether it was over that, the comments on North Korea, why he left. He seemed to have wanted to leave the White House because he seems a lot happier now. Like, I've read quotes of him just today on TV, how he's like, I have my hands on my weapons now. He's referring to his power over the press with Breitbart. That connection there is very strong because that's like Trump's base right there, the people that read that. So people are kind of speculating whether or not Bannon will have more of an influence now that he's outside the White House. He can publicly advocate whatever he wants, and he's outside of any government setting, so it becomes harder to criticize him. But regardless of whether or not Bannon left over that or any other reason, I think it's important in the sense, even though Bannon is a horrible guy, I don't want to get that twisted here. He's a deplorable guy domestically speaking because he's against like any kind of immigrant you could probably imagine. I mean, he once said on a radio show that he would question even bringing in high-skilled immigrants. So, horrible, horrible guy. But on the narrow issue of intervention in foreign countries, some people may not even say that's narrow because you got to talk about like what country is in question here. But I would say if you're not in favor of at least limiting our amount of intervention, the most minimum amount possible would be great. If you're not in favor of that, I would have to really agree to disagree with you. It's clear that the establishment wants to beat the war drums on this North Korea issue. Just as an example, Lindsey Graham, a senator, said we should nuke them. Really, we should nuke North Korea. People on Fox News have made this point. Like, multiple people on Fox News have said we should just nuke them. Jesse Waters said we should try to assassinate Kim Jong-un. And he's like, oh yeah, that would be a lot harder than just nuking them, pretty much. But that's the best option, really. Dude, what if that fails? Okay, have you ever thought of that? Have you ever thought of hey, Trump watches Fox News like crazy, probably, and he watches the shows like The Five that talk about how great he is all the time. So what if you really give Trump that idea that you're gonna assassinate Kim Jong-un and it'll be real clean, it'll be nice? No, that's complete bogus to go down that path, because one screw up with that, and second of all, if you kill Kim Jong-un, right? You think no one's going to take his place? You think no one in the North Korean military, there's no line of succession? Even if it's not someone in the military, someone in the government, whatever, you think someone's not going to take Kim Jong-un's place and nuke Seoul the next day? No. Come on. You're really playing with fire and people's lives, really. That's what you're doing. And Trump, he talked about this a while back. There's this old video circulating on YouTube right now. It's from 1999. This is when Trump was actually considering running as a third-party candidate. He may have actually ran briefly, but he ran on third-party ticket. He had no chance. So he talked about North Korea. It was kind of a hot-button issue back then as well. And he went from saying, oh, I'm going to negotiate the greatest deal ever. I could definitely do that. And then, 2 minutes later, he's like, we should really consider, bombing their missile sites. If we can do that, if they have like nukes pointed at North Korea, North Korea, they have. If North Korea has nukes pointed at New York, we should do that. We should take out their missile sites. Again, if you're floating that as an option, if you're considering preemptively taking out North Korean missile sites, and especially now, because back then they may not have had as many weapons, so I'll give Trump that. You know, I'll be that kind to him, that North Korea maybe didn't have the capabilities that they do now. But let's say if Trump thinks that now, because he said it one time, he's maybe thinking that or a version of it in his head right now. Taking out some missile sites that you know of, we have intelligence over. You think you're going to get all the weapons that North Korea has? You don't think that they have secret stockpiles somewhere, and they can use those to bomb Seoul? If that happens, that's World War III. Done. Game, set, and match. You have U.S., Japan on our side, and South Korea, of course. And in that scenario, if the U.S. attacked first, China would almost, like overwhelmingly, I would say, probably side with North Korea. Because if we attack them first, I just don't see, you know, China in a lot of ways benefits from its relationship with the U.S., but I don't think in that scenario China is going to want to side with the U.S. because it's going to want to say, like, no, we shouldn't be going to war. We shouldn't be going, you know, World War III at this point. And if we attacked them, if this scenario happens, we will have been the aggressors. Okay? So erase whatever history we had before that. If we're really serious about attacking North Korea first, we will have started World War III. And that's because of Trump's ego, ignorance, I don't know what you could call it. It may not even be because of Trump at all. It might be because he has a neocon run government, especially in regards to foreign policy. It's a lot of just the former Bush heads in there. And now Bannon's out. The one voice that was really non-interventionist was Bannon, and now he's gone. It's pretty sad to know that someone in the White House is at this level of, like, just blatant stupidity and childishness. I mean, really, if you're behaving like a teenager on social media and doing this, like going back and forth with a foreign power, not just a foreign power, but a mad one, like a crazy one, that's completely too far gone to be fit to serve, I would say. So then we get, of course, to Charlottesville and white supremacy, the rise of neo-Nazism. I imagine I'll probably have a lot to say about this. It's already been kind of a long video, but let's just go over briefly the facts. There was a statue of Robert E. Lee supposedly going to be taken down, and the white supremacists were out there protesting the removal of this statue. So you had a lot of white supremacist neo-Nazis there in this rally they called Unite the Right. Then you had a lot of counter-protesters, like Antifa people there, just leftist people in general out there counter-protesting. And a terror attack ended up happening and killing one person, Heather Hare, and several others were injured. Like over, I think, 30 people were injured. This guy was in his car, a white supremacist, and just drove through a crowd and caused a lot of damage. So when that happened, there was a series of statements that Trump made where he said, both sides are to blame. People kind of shocked by that. I mean, he more or less said a version of that at first, except then I think that exact quote came in the third presser where he basically had a meltdown. But there was one in between where he went out there and said, we condemn the violence and the killing that was transpired at the hands of the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and white supremacy. So he said it by name. People were basically, begging him to say something. That they were like, you have to condemn this by name. You have to call it for what it is, and not just like talk around and say it's a horrible tragedy. No. You have to say who's at fault, call them by name, because these are the people that support you, and you have to. The right thing to do is to disavow their support. And people felt, at least if he called them by name, at least if he did the bare minimum, that would be fine, I guess. It literally looked like a hostage video. Trump was just reading from a prompter. There was no emotion to what he was saying whatsoever, I guarantee you. But then, there was that third press conference where he just went off the rails and was saying, both sides are to blame. He's like, oh, this is like a slippery slope here. We're taking down statues of Robert E. Lee, maybe Stonewall Jackson next. Well, what's stopping us from taking down a statue of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson? Look, I think you can look at that in many different ways. First of all, my opinion is we shouldn't be idolizing the Founding Fathers, if we're being honest. They were racist, sexist individuals. Majority of them were slave owners, and Thomas Jefferson, in particular, was a very, very horrible guy. Probably the worst of the Founding Fathers, if you had to choose one. So, I would say we're not rewriting history here. All we're saying is that we shouldn't probably be idolizing these people that viewed black people as lesser people. Okay? And even if you don't want to go that far, okay, even if that's like so outside of the realm of respectability or reasonability to you, how about just no Confederate symbols, no Confederate anything in a public space, tax-funded space? If you want to be on private property and put up Confederate whatever, fine, have at it. But if you're in a public space where everyone shares, no Confederate symbols, okay? That is literally a traitorous and terrorist symbol. And if it's a flag, if it's a statue, it represents anti-America, okay? And I do need to stress that. They probably want to tell us, like, oh, yeah, we're all brothers, yeah, it was just my Southern heritage, whatever. Okay. On that issue, like your Southern heritage, that particular flag, the Confederate flag that we think of now, with the X and the red background, that flag was not the national flag of the Confederacy. It was like a rebel flag, more or less a military flag for the Confederates. And then in the Civil Rights Movement, that flag made a resurgence as a symbol for those who were in favor of segregation. So, and they opposed the Civil Rights Movement in general. So, you cannot separate the two. If you want to cling to the Confederate flag as a symbol of your Southern heritage, well, your Southern heritage is racist then. Okay? So you either have to admit that it's a racist symbol or ditch the symbol. It's quite simple. I feel like I make very reasonable arguments when I say this. And I'm not trying to take away your freedom of speech and say that you can't fly a Confederate flag. If you want to be a racist asshole on your own property, fine. and don't intimidate people. Okay. But yeah, you cannot have that symbol as a representative of your town, as your country, whatever. That's what's wrong with it, because it represents that to black people who have ancestors that were slaves. And it's just completely to act like white people know what that's like. I mean, we've never had to think about our place in society in a racial sense. We are privileged enough to not be judged that way. Okay? So Antifa, who was there in many occasions just defending themselves from white supremacists who were taunting them with these torches, these tiki torches that they were carrying, protecting themselves and reporters and people of color there. And I didn't see any offensive violence in this particular instance. There was, an instance where we could point to, like with Milo Yiannopoulos, where I didn't agree with some of the things that were happening. I took issue with people being maced, basically sneaking up on someone and macing them in the face, and like they're unprovoked at all. So that I may not necessarily agree with. So you can criticize the tactics, but you can recognize that the ideology is, there's no moral equivalence. Okay, so that's what Trump's saying, both sides. That's why that is, you got to throw that out the window right off. Because if you want to talk about similar tactics using offensive violence, okay. The white supremacists, one of them killed someone and injured many others, and the white supremacists, they have no problem with that, okay? There was a Vice documentary about this recent rally, and someone says that, they were totally, that was justified, that was self-defense in their view, because they were attacking the car, supposedly. Which I don't even know if that's true, but let's say they were attacking the car, right? You don't have the right to just run people over, okay? So that's what the moral equivalence, like that's why that's wrong. And you're wrong to make that point. If you have the left throwing some punches, macing you, whatever. The argument goes both ways, okay? That doesn't give the right to use violence. Doesn't give the left the right to use violence, in my view, except for when it's self-defense. If you're defending your own life and well-being when you're being attacked by a neo-Nazi, of course, I'm not going to have any problems with you punching them. But when it's unprovoked, I think it's a little bit more of a gray area. I mean, the ideologies, though, you have to acknowledge that they're not the same, okay? People on the left are in favor of equality. They're in favor of judging individuals based on their character and their personality and the strength of their ideas. So it's, and then the white supremacists, they want a straight up genocide of minorities. So it's not equal. It's not even close to equal.